today's video, we are going to see how to create a new data table using build data table activity. A data table can also be created by initializing it and then adding different columns and rows to it. But that we will be covering in a separate video. For now, let's start how to create a data table using build data table activity. Let's search for the activity and drag it. So it looks something like this. We'll click on the data table, and by default there are two columns and two rows present, or one row present. We can provide names to the columns. For that, let's click on edit column, and you can see all these properties or values we can set for any column. We can give a proper column name like name. Then data type, we can select any of the data type. For now, let's keep name as a string. Then we can check whether this column accepts a null value or not. Here it's checked, so we can enter a null value. If you remove this and try to insert a row with null as name, it will not let us insert or add such kind of rows. We can also set a default value over here. Then we can set a unique key constraint on this column by checking this or unchecking. And also we can set a max length of which the value we can enter into this column. By default it is 100. So let's keep it as it is and click on OK. So this is the first one, and let's change the second column and let's make it ID, and let's keep the ID as integer, which is int 32. Allow null, we will not allow null over here, and then it should be unique also. Now click OK. We can add more columns by clicking on plus, and let's say this will be date of birth, and then we can insert the values. Let's make this as date time and click on OK. So we can see that the rows has been added. We can change the sequence of these columns by dragging, and they can be rechanged. We can remove the columns by clicking on this cross button, which will remove the column, and we can remove the rows by clicking this way. Now let's initialize the value. The name we can set, and the date of birth. Now let's click on OK. So we can see that we got an error because the column type ID is mandatory. It does not accept null, and we try to insert a null. So let's give some ID and then try to save it. So perfect, it got saved. Now to print this data table, we can use output data table activity, and we will insert the value of the data table. But before that, we should have this data table stored in a data table variable. So we'll go back to the build data table activity, and in the output we should put a data table variable. So let's create a data table variable by pressing Ctrl K and name the data table as DT and hit enter. If we check the variable section, we can see a variable DT has been created and the type is data table. And then in the output data table, we have to pass the same data table. The output data table converts the data table into a string. So let's store the value in a string, create a variable output data table as a string and display in a message box. Now let's execute and check how the result looks. And perfect, we got the column names, ID, name and DOB, and it has one row, so the values are displayed. a data table is created. So hope this was helpful. To know more about DataTable and other such videos, stay tuned to my channel to see how we can create a data table by assigning or initializing and then adding rows and columns dynamically. Please stay tuned for the next video. Thank you.